Thank you all for joining us today for our presentation. Neuron ESB introduces long-running and fault-tolerant workflow. My name is Bobby Kalagian. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Coordinator for Neuron ESB and the moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar will be presented by Marty Woznicki, General Manager of Neuron ESB. If you are properly logged in to GoToWebinar, you should see the title slide which says Neuron ESB 3.5, Application and Service Integration Platform for Microsoft.NET. Workflow release. If anyone's having a problem, please exit and re-enter the webinar using the link provided upon registration. We'll start off with a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be set to mute for the duration of the presentation. Also, please make sure your phone or headset is muted to avoid any background noise. We strongly encourage participants to ask questions throughout the session by typing them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Please note that all questions will be held to the end, at which time Marty will field the questions. At this time, I'd like to introduce Marty Woznicki.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Pretty excited about this release. This is where we're introducing long-running fault-tolerant workflow. A little bit about myself. Let's see if I can move this forward a bit. I'm the General Manager for the Neuron ESB product team. I've been doing this for a long time. Worked for Microsoft for quite a while in the BizTalk server group. So you folks that do know me, you probably already know my background. Our goal with building out Neuron ESB was basically we wanted something a lot easier to use, something native to the .NET platform and something that developers could just pick up very easily. So we've got an agenda here. I'm actually going to try to go through some of this as quickly as I can so we can get right into the guts of Neuron ESB 3.5. So we'll hit about what we do, kind of what makes us unique. And then when it comes to Neuron 3.5, we'll talk about the user experience changes, some of the management features we've added, certainly some new adapters, new ways to do service composition, but more importantly, the long-running workflow that we just introduced. I know some folks have been waiting for this for a long time, and I'm really happy that we're able to provide it now. So for folks who might not be very familiar with Neuron ESB, Neuron ESB provides a lot of capabilities. When we think about integration, we think about business process management, workflow now, certainly messaging. We started providing distributed messaging, so we have a client API that you can host in your own .NET apps. We provide hierarchical topic-based pub-sub. Very unique in the industry, though. We allow you to choose the quality of service and even the underlying transport for that messaging. So sometimes people just need to message enable their existing applications. We do that rather well. Now tying things together very easily, that's where integration comes in. So we provide adapters and an ability to create custom adapters. Certainly business process design. We really focused on a lot of low latency performance type issues when we were developing Neuron. So our business process designer was completely stateless, no tracking, graphical experience for designing business logic, but very, very fast. And that was the same with the messaging. In this release, as you'll see, we're introducing the long-tolerant, long-running type of workflows where you can do service composition still, but long-running transactions, compensated transactions, even correlated sends and receives, and do cool things like singleton patterns. And we'll get into those a little later. And then also we function as a web service broker. So we actually are our own host. We can host our own services, whether those be REST or SOAP-based, and regardless of packet XML JSON. So being able to dynamically route the back-end services. And then we apply security management operations on top of all these things. Now, we're fairly unique because we really focus on that agility, extensibility, and ease of use. What we wanted was something that .NET developers could easily learn and they could do the work. But that means providing that agile environment and providing true extensibility, right, and ease of use. We want something that people can learn very, very fast. And when we put all these things together, we find that if we focus on those .NET resources, well, then that means customers don't really have to go out and find a $200 an hour schema editor expert, right? They can actually use the existing stack, and they're working in an environment that they're comfortable in, and they can be more productive in that environment. collectively, with that extensibility, the agility, the native.NET environment, we're able to reduce that cost quite a bit for our customers. Now, having said that, Neuron ESB 3.5. Some of the themes we worked on with this was user experience, management, connectivity, service composition. Slightly different take on that, but long-running, business resilient, fault-tolerant workflow, and that was really big. Now, I've added that at the end, so we'll be covering that at the end. Some of these other things we'll be able to move through fairly quickly, but workflow is it's a big feature. We'll spend some time on it. So when I think about the user experience, I always think things need to be easier, right? Easier to find, easier to use, easier to put things together. And we really do focus on ease of use. It's big for us. So previously, give you an example, when users used to open the Neuron ESB Explorer just to, whether it was to create a solution, open an existing solution, or connect to an existing solution, they were presented with our Connect dialog box. And although this provided the capability, a little confusing for people, especially for developers who are working on a lot of different solutions. They needed to get to those solutions pretty quickly. So this kind of hampered productivity a little bit. Well, in Neuron ESB 3.5, we changed that a bit, right? So let's go ahead and see what that looks like now. If I go in here, let me go to my desktop. All right. Well, as I said previously, what you see is now a blank canvas. Before, you would be presented with this Connect dialog in earlier versions, but now it's much easier to open and close and access different solutions. Notice I can just go right to the File menu. I can create a new solution very easily now. I can open an existing solution, navigate to it, not a problem. And I also don't have to worry about remembering, where the last solution was that I opened. We implemented an MRU list, so I can say, great, I want to see that default solution, outstanding. Now, by default, this will not be configured with the sample solution anymore. When we were shipping Neuron, we'd always configure it with a sample solution, and every now and again that might cause a little angst for some folks, just because sometimes it used MSMQ, they might not have that installed, and they'd see an error message maybe in their box, or they were using a sample solution to actually modify and turn into their own solution rather than creating a new one. Now we don't set this at all. So if you try to, let me go ahead and stop this. If I go ahead and try to start this back up, you'll get a nice error message letting you know, hey, configure your solution appropriately. So I can go back in here, configure it to use my default solution, bring that up, just like so. And you can still go in here and under deployment, under servers, you can see how everything is configured. I've got two runtime instances installed. I can certainly see that this is the default solution. I can certainly see that this is currently a demo solution. I can certainly start that up. Now, some other things that we've done as well, made things a little bit more accessible. If I want to just see the event log, I can just go to the event log and see that. If I want to go ahead and go to endpoint health, I can navigate directly to endpoint health, and you can also see that we changed the experience here a little bit as well. Notice it's a new UI, and although you can't see a lot of activity here, if I go into, say, this other instance, what I want to do is connect. We still have connect, but I want to connect live to that running instance. Now, we made some changes. This Connect dialog still gives you the basic functionality where you can go against our discovery server, see all the instances installed, and just connect. Consequently, we also enabled WS Discovery on our runtime, as well as services hosted by Neuron, as well as parties hosted by Neuron. Now, what does that really provide you? Well, it provides some really interesting management things for us. But say if you were remotely hosting our party API, one of our clients did that where it was embedded in a workflow application across 3,000 desktops. Well, they could actually use WS Discovery to find where all those elements were hosted. In WS Discovery, if you don't know, web services, dynamic discovery, that's exactly what it is. It's a management standard and specification. Basically defines a multicast discovery protocol to locate services on your network. And this is all over SOAP over UDP. And you'll find with Neuron, we've actually implemented an ad hoc mode as well as a managed mode. So either we can broadcast or we can go against our own discovery server with this. So now if I want to, I can just double click and connect with this. And if I go into endpoint health, this has quite a few more elements in it. Endpoint health has changed quite a bit. So now I can see all the machines in my deployment group. And I can do a lot of things like sorting, grouping, see what's disabled, see what's started. I can still go in here and right-click, restart services, things of that nature. And one thing you'll find too is you can also monitor all the workflow endpoints that you might have. Right? So nice user experience change around endpoint health. And that's what we wanted to provide, a better experience all the way around, so it's easy to navigate between solutions, easy to start them up, also easy to find our runtimes, so that you don't actually have to know server names, etc. And you'll find later as we go into WS Discovery, we actually expose a lot of metadata, and we do a few other nice things around that. We'll be expanding on WS Discovery as we grow our product moving forward. Now, management, perfect lead into. What we wanted to do with management was we have endpoint health, we have all the audited messages, things of that nature, but we find that there are people who want to use maybe Microsoft's SCOM, other people you want to use third-party products, other people really kind of roll their own when it comes to management. So what we've gone and done, we've exposed more events via WMI. We've implemented some WS Discovery, which is kind of some pretty interesting things that we can do with that. We also expose most of this information via RESTful services. Now, first, let's go back into WS Discovery. As I said, it's a management standard, SOAP over UDP. It's nice, so when you think about WS Discovery, think about how you find printers on your network. They actually use WS Discovery, right, to broadcast. But WS Discovery has a couple of cool modes, and that's ad hoc and managed. Ad hoc is that broadcast, right, over UDP. Managed is where they know about the master, kind of like master name server, so to speak, and they register with that via TCP. So we've implemented both, and many of these options are just configurable through the app.config file, whether it's our ESB service app.config, our discovery runtime service app.config, and if you're using remote parties, well, remote parties, in your app.config, you can put those flags in it to say, hey, do we want to be able to find you, right? So by default, our runtime, any service hosted by Neuron, so client connectors, and any parties that you designate as a remote party can use WS Discovery. Now, having said that, we also implemented the Discovery API to make this easier to use for people. So if we take a look at Discovery, there we are. So our Discovery API, as you can see the namespace, is neuron.esb.discovery. Now Microsoft also has a Discovery API, and that'll work just fine as well, but we wanted to simplify the experience. Right, so underneath the covers, it's going to be using a lot of those same APIs. We're exposing events. We allow you to call things synchronously as well as making asynchronous calls to find very specific things. So notice here I can look and say, hey, I want to find either configuration service as a Neuron runtime, our own discovery proxies, the peer resolver service, or any remote parties or service endpoints. And then when we implement these, we implement broadcasting and some announcements, and again, you can enable, disable certain elements of these. But we also implement a fair amount of metadata. So when I'm grabbing a remote party, I can also grab kind of like what server they're connected to, what configuration they have, you know, lots of elements. We've also added application scopes and contracts to these, so you can use these just with Microsoft's own Discovery API. Running through this, again, asynchronous calls, run through, lots of things that we expose here. if I was running Microsoft's API, as long as I knew our URL, which we basically just append Neuron ESB 3.5 onto it, I could use Microsoft's Discovery API, use find criteria, look for specific service types. I could grab all the services hosted by Neuron, right, and get those results back. If I go ahead and run this, pretty easy to do. I can see that I'm getting the broadcast online. I've got a couple of different runtimes, the default solution, the demo solution, metadata, and there we go. Now, what if I had a party connected? I could go ahead and, let's go ahead and just do that. Let's launch a test client. In this case, even the test clients have the built-in connectivity for WS Discovery. So now I don't have to really know the server and the bootstrap address. I can just say, hey, I want to connect to the default instance. Double-click on that, grab it, home publisher, connect. Pretty simple to do. Now, if I want to see that, right now I'm only capturing online events for runtimes. I'll run this again. There we are. And notice now you've got, there we are, remote party found, home publisher. Right, so all I did was configure my test client so it could be seen as a remote party. So kind of an interesting way for us to discover where all of the Neuron parties are hosted in the environment and actually receive metadata from them. All right, so let's go ahead and disconnect that. So Windows Management Instrumentation. We work with this a lot. One of the things we wanted to do was, well, we always had the ability to capture failed messages. Well, one of the things we added with 3.5 was to be able to capture the state change events of endpoints. So if an adapter endpoint or a client connector or a service endpoint, if any of those things change state, we should be able to see these. So if I look in here, and the nice thing about this is just using WMI, right? There's no Neuron assemblies around this. We recently built a prototype adapter for one of our customers using WMI to capture failed messages, and then when that failed message, capture it, publish it to the bus, rather than, say, pulling our database and monitoring it that way. So more of an event-based way. So the new event is endpoint state changed, and notice you can actually add query conditions to this. Maybe, hey, this is the only endpoint I want to see, time spans for this, and when this changes, we'll even propagate any kind of error information across as well. So if I go ahead and say, let's just run this. There we are. And let's see, I'm in today. I believe this is connections, service endpoints. Let me bring this up. Here's our WMI screen. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new service hosted by Neuron. Home publisher, here we go. Home, host, my client URL. There we are. And I'll hit apply, I'll hit save. Outstanding. That'll go online, and notice I just captured that event. So that also means if I go in here, start monitoring, I can see a client connector, and if I stop that service, I can also capture that event and all the metadata around that event. So again, for remote monitoring solutions, just WMI can be used. Now, having said that, we also expose WMI performance counters. Most of you are familiar with those, and hence new performance counters were introduced for workflow. So some of the things that you'll see in here now, Neuron availability groups and Neuron workflow endpoints. So with Neuron workflow endpoints, you can see things like aborted, active, canceled state, completed, all these, right? Pending, get all the information you might want. And availability groups are the individual hosting environments they run in. So you can actually capture the errors and warnings from these as well, just via WMI performance counters. Okay, so let's bring that down. And let's go back to our presentation. Lots and lots of good things. So now we get into REST. What we wanted to do with REST was basically expose almost all the server management, deployment, configuration, endpoint health, and audited messages via REST. So users could build their own interfaces, and we're actually using these interfaces under the hood moving forward. But you could basically build anything to manage Neuron at that point. So if I go in here, there we go. Let's go into a browser. So if you just go to the server, we expose the REST interface off 51002/help. You can actually see runtime support, what that information looks like, deployment information, configuration, endpoint health information, as well as message activity. So this means that you can not only query to get this information, but say for endpoint health, you can actually change the state of an endpoint. You could go ahead and stop the endpoint or restart the endpoint. Right? So anything where you're passing a state to it, you have the ability to remotely stop the runtime or restart the runtime or determine whether the runtime's even started or not, right? The actual instance. So you can monitor these things remotely just using REST. Here I have here's endpoint health, endpoint runtime. So let's try this, select it, send it back. There we go. So you'll get all the information when it comes to endpoint health. All the information that we expose in endpoint health, we expose here. Not just for topics, adapter endpoints, service endpoints, but also all the workflow now. And go back into history, endpoint health. On the runtime side, I can get all the configuration. So if I do a send here, I can get all the configuration. So if you look at that configuration here, one of the things you'll see, it matches up with everything configured here in the configure server dialog. Right, so it gives you the opportunity to basically retrieve this information and edit that information. All right, so let's go back here and let's close the default. RESTful management. So database. We did some work on the database. There was a significant amount of work to upgrade our database to support workflow, and workflow not just the persistence side of the house, but also tracking. Along with that, that meant introducing SQL Server agent jobs. One was definitely necessary to basically purge out old tracking records. That has to be run about every 5 minutes, and we'll show you that. But we also introduced a new purge and archive job that you can configure. Now, we ship all these. Well, first, upgrading the database. Let's look at that. Upgrading the database, we've made this incredibly simple. Just like it has been in other. If you have a database here and it's an old one, all you do is create test. All you do is hit test create. We will actually look at what that version is, and we will automatically run the alter scripts, set up the new SQL job. We'll do everything right from that test create button. Right? The first thing you'll see is, all right, well, this is up to date, so I don't have to update it. If it was, I'd be prompted, hit OK, and we'd just run the update script, as well as create the SQL Server agent job for you. If you were going to manually do this, we changed our scripting schemas, so that made a little bit more sense and easier to upgrade from previous versions. So we're supporting upgrades all the way from 2.6. Creating a database now isn't just one database script. You would run this if you want to do all this manually. You'd run the create neuron database, and then you'd run each one of these things in their numbered order until you get to the final one. Now, if you want to run the jobs, the purge and archive job, you would have to go ahead and run this in SQL Management Studio and then configure the SQL agent job. Now, when you install or create a database through our UI, we automatically create this, the purge workflow tracking job. So if you go into the, here we go, go in here, you'll see every Neuron database has a purge workflow tracking job. And by default, this is scheduled to run, I believe, about every 5 minutes. Now you can alter this script, right? We actually only delete so many records every 5 minutes. You can change that depending on how optimized your database is. We wanted flexibility there, right? So depending on the database, what kind of load it can take, you can actually play with these numbers. Certainly how often you delete and the number of records that you delete. On the purge and archive jobs, you can actually configure those. How many days back do you want to basically archive your records, and then those things that are archived, you tell us what the database name should be. We back it up to that, and then we delete those records from the existing database. So I know a lot of people have asked for the purge and archive job in the past, so we thought, we better just provide it, and it should really be coming from us. Connectivity, so we're big believers when it comes to connectivity. So we'll always be working on this, and you'll probably see a big bump on this in the next couple of months. I think there's about a half a dozen things that we want to build out very quickly. But we wanted to make sure that we introduced NetSuite. And NetSuite we kind of introduced a little early, but we fine-tuned it for this release. And also Microsoft Dynamics Online, right? We've always had this great connectivity with Microsoft Dynamics. We introduced the new subscription-based adapter in our 3.1 release, where it could generate metadata, create schemas and sample messages, and really simplify interaction with CRM. And we've always had our plugin, our workflow plugin, where we could capture events from Dynamic CRM and auto-publish those to the bus if it was on-premise. Well, now we've extended that to online. So with NetSuite, NetSuite functions just like our existing CRM subscription adapter and our Salesforce adapter, insofar that you can actually look at the entities on the back end. You can select these. You can auto-generate the schemas for these as well as sample XML messages. And our goal there was to make connectivity with NetSuite very, very easy to do. And underneath the covers, it supports pretty much everything the SuiteTalk Web Services platform supports. On the Dynamic CRM side, when it comes to online, well, now we have a workflow plugin that can work for Dynamic CRM Online, which means that we can publish events when they happen directly to Neuron from the online instance. So now we not only have the the on-premise, but also the the online service as well. So a really full story when it comes to Dynamic CRM connectivity. Composition, I love this, the cornerstone of business innovation. So Neuron ESB has always been great at service composition, right? We actually ship a scatter-gather pattern. And scatter-gather pattern is your typical, I have a process that's exposed by a web service, and now I need to call, who knows, n number of vendors or n number of services. I might need to run business rules, aggregate these things, might have to do a lot of different things. And then what I need to do is take that result and send it back to the user. In some cases, the user might still be waiting. So that means a lot of these activities might need to be run asynchronously, right? There might be lots of different mediation that has to happen in the middle and mapping. So our process designer did this really well, and our new workflow designer does this just as well. But we wanted to find ways to decrease latency and increase performance and make it just a little simpler. Previously, users would, just to call a service, you always had to use either the service process step, or if you wanted to call a service or an adapter endpoint. And quite frankly, in the Neuron world for us, an endpoint is an endpoint, whether that's a service or whether it's a file adapter or an adapter to CRM. It's just an endpoint that's subscribing to something. And we're abstracting that experience. So you would always publish to a topic. The problem is now you're using messaging, or if you're using the service process step, you have to know, it gets a little bit more complex. So we wanted to make, how do we make this easier to do? Now you can call any service or adapter endpoint directly. You can circumvent the bus entirely, and you can just select these from a drop-down box, or you can even set these dynamically at runtime. So now you have the dynamic invocation. You don't have any overhead of, say, a topic-based pub sub in the middle of the process. and the service or the adapter endpoint, and you can compose these things. So what does that look like? Well, let's take a look. If I'm in here, I can first, let me go ahead and open up our scatter gather process sample. And I'm going to configure Neuron to run this. And notice it has finance, publishers and subscribers. I don't believe it has any message activity. Great. Let me configure this to run that sample. Scatter gather. We actually ship this sample with the product. There we go. Let me go ahead and restart this. So basically in this sample we have a service hosted by Neuron, the Contoso service, and then we have service endpoints that we route information to. And that means I've got this and I probably need to run this. So if I have the scatter gather solution, let me go ahead and start up the new quote service. And let me start up the old quote service, just like so. And these are just services that are going to receive information. Outstanding. Okay. And this process, the scatter gather, is what we shipped. It was simple, just do everything's dynamic, just split and aggregate, and call these services, but we published these services to a topic, and then hence that would be published to the topic would route to the endpoint because they're subscribers, get the information back, and hence aggregate these results. And that was fun, especially if you're using topics that are, say, in-memory routing like TCP or name pipes for this example you could do very easily. We don't have the durability of the transaction hit, right, which is nice. You could have that. You could change it to MSMQ or RabbitMQ, the underlying topic. So if you take a look at the topic by default, I think I turned auditing on, and you can change the network transport to whatever you want depending on the performance requirements and things of that nature. Okay, but still kind of more, there's kind of like more cogs in the process, so to speak, but works rather well. If I go ahead and call this now, let me go into the scatter gather. Here we go. We'll go ahead and call that service. There we go. So service gets a service, and I get this aggregated response back. Outstanding. And if I go into Neuron, you can see that a lot of things went across the topic because we had auditing on, and hence we were able to audit every message that went through. Again, outstanding. Well, now you can do some other things, right? Let me go into our documents. And messaging. So on the scatter gather update, if I wanted to, I could use a parallel shape. So in other words, I still have a thread for every branch. I could also call these things dynamically, right? Notice here I just quickly set up where I'm setting the action for each service. I'm setting the transform for each service and then writing out some tracing. I'm also sending something to an adapter. And notice I have these configured where this is a file archive endpoint, just a drop down from hence. This is a registered adapter endpoint in Neuron. Here are the registered service endpoints in Neuron. But I could call all these dynamically if I wanted to. But the whole point here is now I can actually build service composition scenarios, whether I'm using service endpoints or adapter endpoints, directly without having to ever go through the bus. Right? So running this is pretty simple to do. In fact, let me see. I know I'm going to output a file here, but running this fairly simple to do. I can run this, put in a message, and I think I just have to have a source ID, and source ID is publisher. I think that is finance, and I think my semantic needs to be a request. And I think I still have these up and running, right? These are the services that I'll be calling. And I can test this right in Designer. They'll set the actions. These are just going to go bounce back and forth because they're all on different threads. And hence, these guys got the messages, individual messages. And also, hey, I can knock something out to a file as well, the original request. But now, notice if I go into activity, nothing really is going over the bus here, right? There's no messages. So what I'm doing is I'm really just eliminating. What I've done is eliminate pretty much any and all latency of topics, publishers, subscribers, etc., any kind of contention that might cause in any kind of service composition scenario. And this is a great way to directly model your process and what endpoints you're going to without really having to deal with topics and subscribers individually. You can actually call any registered endpoint now directly. Convenient and definitely helps performance all the way around. So workflow. We did a lot of work here. We've been working on this for the last year. Wow. So if you take a look at, well, how would I explain this? I think a majority, well, almost a majority of solutions require some sort of business process design where, you know, fault tolerance, persistence, even maybe event tracking, not necessarily that necessary, especially when you get into request-response type message exchange patterns, like in the web service world. This is where you need something that can execute very, very fast and have a lot of capabilities. And hence, what you see in our process designer today, right? This doesn't do any persistence behind the scene. There's no tracking information unless you implement your own tracking. Obviously, we track any exception information, and we'll let you know that there's an exception, what process step, what process called it, etc. And these are actually hosted in the parties themselves, so in the individual endpoints. Workflow is a little different. Workflow, people want to see, you know, persistence, workflow tracking. In other words, I want to be able to replay my workflow. I want to see every activity, all the state behind that. So if I had a message or I had a variable initialized at this step and I changed it at the next step, I want to see what the values were, especially if I need to debug these things at some point. Typically, they want to do have some ability to simulate execution. There needs to be obviously design time experience, but workflow is about, most workflow is about fault tolerance. So imagine the scenario where you have a process that might need to run for hours or days or weeks. Maybe part of that process is I'm sending information out to my warehouse and I've got to wait to hear back to see if inventory exists before I can continue on in that process. And during that time, you might have 1,000 instances of workflow running. You don't want these things running in memory, right? We'll actually now unload these into a database for efficiency purposes. But now we're also persisting, and we give you the ability to persist at certain points behind the scenes, which means now if the hosting environment that ran that workflow dies for whatever reason, someone trips over the power cord, there you go. These workflows will actually start up at that last persistence point on another box, whatever box you have designated. So one of the things that we implemented within Neuron you'll find is clustering support, right? And this isn't Windows clustering. We kind of modeled it after Windows clustering, but this is our own clustering, right? So we built our own runtime environment, our own clustering environment, our own scheduling and queuing of messages and workflows. We built our own tracking and playback, control and monitoring. And then we built in a fair amount of ESB integration. Because really, what's the point of workflow if you can't integrate with the rest of the system, especially being able to publish the topics, being able to use our auditing, being able to do so many different things. How about call adapter and service endpoints directly, just like you can do in a process now? Well, you can do that in a workflow. We have our language editors where we allow developers to write C#, C# classes, VB.NET, JavaScript, and debug these things. Well, we ported all that great stuff, productivity work from the process designer directly into our own workflow designer. So we did a lot of work here to make Windows Workflow Foundation actually enterprise ready. You know, and custom correlation was a big thing. It's one of the reasons we could never replace orchestration in the past with BizTalk orchestration with Windows Workflow. It was the lack of custom correlation support. So we actually built that on. And when we can do custom correlation, it's interesting. We can do a lot of interesting patterns like singleton patterns. So think of, say, hey, I've just debatched something with the process engine, but now what I need to do is I need to aggregate a lot of information all these same records from the batch. So that means I need to be able to identify, say, a set of messages that are unique, not a single message. And when I'm sending information out to a warehouse and maybe waiting for something to come back in, this is where I need to perhaps define a custom correlation set on my publish step and then assign that to the receive. So in other words, I can't tell Walmart to insert a GUID in the message they send me back, right? I typically have to know, well, what's going to be, what unique set of properties within this message? What are the properties that will make this unique? And then look for these properties when messages get published back in. And hence we can correlate and make sure that the response actually started the correct instance of the workflow. So we did all that work. We allow users to import existing WF workflows so they can actually make use of their existing investments. We implemented workflow simulations so they can test and literally run these workflows right there. They can create reports, save images, copy, paste. Again, brought in like 30 new activities for productivity and all the great C# work. If I look into this now, let me go in here. And I'm going to just open up, say, our demo solution. Here we go. And I'll go into, say, well, let me see, I need a message. Let me go into my repository, and I think I have that payment message. Outstanding. Oh, guess I forgot to save it. Well, that happens. But perfect. I'll do something like that. Let me go into this output and get rid of this message. So when you create a workflow now within Neuron, one of the things you have is they're all stored in the same space, in the same library. They have a slightly different icon. Let me bring that up. There we go. So when you create one of the things that you can do is say, now I create a process, or I import a workflow, or I create a new workflow. When you create a workflow, you have the option of just, hey, this is a normal workflow. Yeah, I might do some correlated sends and receives, but it's a regular workflow. I expect it to be long running. It's not going to send a response back to any user, right? Because it's long running, fire and forget. I could also create a request reply workflow. In other words, this is the type of workflow where you're going to send in a message, and it might be, say, initiated by a client connector, right? A service hosted by Neuron, and hence you want a message back to that client. So it generates a response message. Or you might need like a singleton pattern where, hey, I've got to aggregate a lot of messages of the same type, and I only want one instance to work on all messages of like type, and hence you can create these correlated workflows. So you have the ability to do that, and when you do that, we actually create these, and we'll go ahead and set very specific arguments on these and variables. So when it comes to ESB integration, we integrate pretty much with the entire Neuron system. So in other words, a Neuron ESB message is what comes in. You have access to the Neuron ESB configuration, also all the environmental variables, right? So you can set these and you can create new arguments. If I'm working with this, notice here I've just used a flowchart. I have a decision. I'm just writing some text out to the output window. Notice this is our language editor. So you'll see 30+ new activities. And again, you see all our language activities. Lots of activities to work and audit messages, create messages, do correlated request replies, receive messages. You have the adapter endpoint sets, service endpoints. So in other words, you can reuse all of the registered endpoints, whether those are service endpoints or adapter endpoints, in the system. And you can test right here. If I want to expand this, I can go ahead and say edit code. And what do I have? I have the exact same coding experience that I have in the Neuron Process Designer. So we were shooting for consistency, right? That's really important for us. We want this to be easy to use, easy to learn. So we're also working on shipping several samples, workflow samples with the product with documentation to get people jump-started. Here I'm just going to write something to the event log. I'm doing a try-catch here. And if I double-click this, this is where I'm auditing the message again. And then here I'm literally using an adapter endpoint, just like that, right? Just select it out of the blue like that. Perfect. Again, I don't have to actually publish to the bus. If I want, I could put a publish date here and publish to subscribers. And then next, I'm going to call a service endpoint, that same payment service. So let's see what I have here. I've got a payment service right here. And I can do this kind of simulation pretty easily. Let's see, put the message in here. I think I need this. An action. And I think I need, let's see here. Let's go source ID. I think this is just publisher 1. Let's go topic. Let me just verify that real quick. Go into messaging, topic 1, and dependencies. Perfect. Go back in here. There's my action. There's my message. And let's see here. Let's go in the source ID and say this is going to be, let's see here. Publisher 1. And topic-wise, this will be topic 1. Great. There we go, right, get my output in. Oh, and that's right. What am I missing? Let's do this, load some environmental variables. So one of the things I'm doing in the C# step, there we go. Perfect. Audit, bring it in. And I've got that. Oh, and of course, let's see here. I think that's where it errored out. Let me put this back at multicast. And let's see. And the beauty of this is now I get a failure message. There we are. No topics. So you can actually do all your simulation directly in Neuron. And let me go ahead and connect to this. Perfect. Process, activity. Excellent. Now let's see, if I was doing, let me go in here and launch a test client real quick. And I want to connect to this just, there we are. Oh, well, now we know why. Let's go in here. Sorry, folks. Demo solution. There we are. I was wondering why certain things were not getting called. Let's go ahead and restart this. I forgot up here, right? It said scatter gather. I never changed my runtime over. My mother would say it's my father's fault, but I won't go there. Let's have some fun and do this again. Excellent. And now we're running. Okay. And what do we have here? Great. And in this case now, activity connect. All right, demo solution, right? All right. And where is my client? There we go, request pub. So now what I have here is what I'm going to do. I actually have a request reply service. Go in here. I have a request reply service. All this is going to do is create a reply message, text, and write. So one of the things that we implemented here was, oh, and I should talk to you about the hosting environment. Let's go in here, deployment availability groups. So one of the nice things about Neuron is with workflow endpoints, once you create a workflow endpoint, right, you create it by assigning basically a workflow to it, what the subscriber is, the topic, in other words, how are we going to receive messages, the queue in the workflow system, and the availability group is the hosting environment. So if I look here and I run, I'll always see here's the ESB service exe, and these are the Neuron runtime instances. ESB host, there will be an ESB host exe for each workflow endpoint. If I kill this, all right, it will restart. When you go ahead and define the availability groups, you can define these to run on specific environments. So for instance, I have localhost, retries, and I'm going to say, hey, my production, and this will be my failover server. And the idea here is that now, if say this fails on one of the machines, say the machine itself fails, that means all these things will roll over and start up where they left off on the failover box. Right? So hence we built our own clustering support into this. There we go. Perfect. So once you create the workflow itself, you can create the availability groups to host these, and these can host multiple workflow endpoints, so you can assign as many as you want to these or just have one for isolation. The request response workflow, pretty simple like this. Now when you run it, send in a request, this message actually gets queued up into a database for the workflow, and then our scheduler takes over, runs these things. So this is just a request reply. Notice I got the reply right back pretty fast. But now with Neuron, you can also go in here and see all the activity tracking. So in this case, I can see every step, every activity, walk through, create reply, see what that reply message looks like. I can view the ESB message, all the properties, all the custom properties. I can actually go back in here, edit this, and resubmit it back, publishing it to the system again. So all the tracking work is already built in to replay this. And you can save out these messages as well and check out the different variables. And that also means if it's an ESB message, you have all the ESB properties that you can inspect. Any header properties will be in here. Any HTTP properties, any SOAP properties, you have access to everything. So with the availability side, fault tolerant, you've got the failover and persistence model, cluster-like functions. So we handle the failover and the restarts, all the dehydration. You've got the simulation that we saw before, right? You've got all the Visual Studio Code editors, all the new activities, and correlated sends and receives. If I go into this, let's just open this up and let's go into, there we are. And I'm going to go into the workflow endpoint itself. If you were building a singleton pattern, one of the things that you can do is you can define what makes a unique set of messages. So this same correlation set editor is present on our publish step. So in that case, you create a correlation set, and then you have a receive shape that can follow that correlation set to determine what makes a message unique or what makes a set of messages unique. When you're dealing with a set of messages, then you actually configure that on the workflow endpoint. So notice here I can actually do some cool things. I can use custom neuron properties, right? So, and I can either put it in or pick anything here that's actually registered in our system already, like say any of the adapter properties, right? Great way to access those. Here I can just click on the action, right? Different properties here. I can put in HTTP headers, query parameters. I can do regular expressions or XPath expressions against the body. And so lots of flexibility when it comes to creating a correlation set, right? This is where I would define what a unique set of messages. Let's see here. And we went over the workflow tracking. So you have the ability, the nice thing with workflow tracking, you can do a lot of things with this. You can search, sort. If I went back into this, let's go into recent, demo solution, activity, workflow tracking. All right, and here I have many of the same capabilities I had in endpoint health. If I wanted to, I could say, let's sort this by state and group by state, right? So I might have different workflows in here, maybe from different topics, from different subscribers, publishers, different types of workflows, and I can group and sort these here. I can also add any kind of filtering I want here as well, right? Just here, I can choose which fields I want to show. So I can filter at this level. And I can also say, hey, I want to see all the things that are maybe in an unloaded state. In other words, you might have workflows that are completely dehydrated right now, right, because they're waiting for responses. By default, after 60 seconds, we will actually unload the workflow and put it in the persistent database. Right? And then you could, if you had something started, you could just simply right-click, and depending on the state, your right-click options will determine what you can do with that workflow, right? In other words, if this was, say, in a started state, I could suspend it. I would see an option here for that. If this wasn't completed, I could actually stop it or abort it or cancel it. I can always export this to Excel, the entire grid, and then sort and search and do whatever I'd like there. And I can determine how many max messages, frames, and these states tend to be things like basically not completed yet. Think of it that way. Maybe you had a process that was running, a workflow that was running, and it started a month ago. Well, you might want to see that. Whereas, if you're running lots and lots of workflow instances on your query, it might not bring it up if you've got this, if you've got this parameter in here for date. But you could say, hey, you know what? Maybe I just want to see everything that's currently aborted, suspended, or unloaded, and you could do things like that. Anyhow, that really concludes our webcast. I think we did a lot of great things with Neuron ESB 3.5. I think the long-running workflow is just very, very cool. But we did a lot of other things too, not just connectivity, but management, working with WS Discovery, WMI, RESTful services. We wanted to, really work on the user experience as well when it came to working with lots of solutions back and forth for developers. But I think the long-running workflow will come in handy for many of our customers. And I think this will also give most of our customers an opportunity to simply retire a lot of the BizTalk orchestration work out there. It's really, the BizTalk orchestration engine was kind of built in 2003 and it hasn't changed since, and no one's changing it in the future. I think even Microsoft understands it's dead technology. Anyhow, if you have any questions, this is the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. We did have a ton of questions roll through. Since we are short on time, I'll go ahead and ask a couple of them, and we'll make sure to follow up with everyone that asked the questions after the webinar with a written answer. First question that I have is, we have started using SharePoint workflow, which is very limited. Do you have a way to integrate with SharePoint 2013 so we could use your product instead of the built-in SharePoint 2013 workflow?
Sure. So Neuron ships with a SharePoint adapter, and we also ship a plugin for SharePoint. So that means we can actually capture any event within SharePoint on a list, and that can be configured at the SharePoint level. So that means that information can be auto-published to the bus, to a topic, and hence a workflow can subscribe to that. Right? Workflow now, workflow endpoints are just subscribers to published events.
Great, thank you. Next question I got is, will you be providing sample code for changing the state of endpoints?
Changing the state of endpoints. We certainly can. That would be RESTful code, so yeah, there's no reason why we can't. I like that.
Great, and last question I'm going to ask on air is, will there be any best practices provided for using direct service endpoint calls versus topics?
Change state. Yes. So when it comes to direct service endpoint calls, one guidance would be really just always use them. I mean, I would never, unless you were publishing to a service configured as a datagram, which tends to be more of the exception than the rule, I would say always use the service endpoints, because you can dynamically set the not just the service endpoint name for the service endpoint process step, and you can use that same there's a service endpoint process step as well as a service endpoint workflow activity, right? So that same capability exists in workflow as well as in the process designer. So you can dynamically set the service name, but even with the service name set, you can dynamically set the URL and action, etc. So we support all the same things. So I honestly don't see any reason why anyone would be using, say, the service process step anymore, or the or calling it via, say, a topic, right? Especially if you're using, say, a distributed client API, that would make almost no sense, because you can do everything you can do in a service step. You can do even more in a service endpoint if it's registered or configured, and it's far less complex, and you're not taking any overhead at all. So, yeah, for
Great.
adapter endpoints,
Well,
I could. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to conclude the webinar. Go ahead, Marty.
I was going to say for the adapter endpoint activity and the adapter endpoint process step, let's see here. If most of these are subscribed, like just fire and forget, you may very well want to still, say, publish that over a topic if you need to, say, abstract that for some reason. In other words, you really didn't want the process or the publisher to care or know or know any details about the endpoint, say, you were publishing to when it came to, say, an adapter endpoint. But if that really wasn't necessary, then again, I would say just use the adapter endpoint. The nice thing about using these new process steps and new workflow activities is that you can more directly model the interaction between all the endpoints directly on the same designer.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. This does conclude our webcast. Again, if you did ask a question that did not get answered, we will follow up with a written response to you. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day.